The war entered its third year. The initial, naive optimism of 1914, the belief in a swift, decisive victory, had long since curdled into a grim, grinding reality. And a new phrase, one that would define the very essence of the conflict, entered the global vocabulary: the war of attrition. It was a concept as brutal as it was simple. The grand maneuvers and sweeping advances of past wars were gone, replaced by a static, blood-soaked stalemate. It was no longer about breaking through the enemy's line. It was about grinding them down. It was about systematically bleeding the other side white, destroying their armies, shattering their economies, and breaking their will to fight. This was the year the machine, the literal steel machine of industry, took center stage, not as a tool of maneuver, but as an instrument of industrial-scale extermination. And two names, two sprawling, cratered landscapes in France, came to symbolize the sheer, unimaginable scale of the slaughter: Verdun and the Somme. The German High Command, under its chief of the General Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, devised a chillingly logical plan. He believed the war would be won not on the Eastern Front against Russia, but by breaking the will of the Western Allies. His focus fell upon France. He devised a plan for a limited offensive, not to achieve a breakthrough, but to force a battle of annihilation. He would attack the ancient fortress city of Verdun. Falkenhayn's calculus was cold and precise. He chose Verdun not to capture it, but precisely because he knew the French would never let it fall. Its historical and psychological importance was so immense that France would sacrifice everything to hold it. He called it a place where the French would be compelled to throw in every man they have. The goal was to turn Verdun into a Mehlmühle, a meat grinder for the French army. He would bleed them to death, forcing them to sue for peace. It was a strategy of pure, calculated exhaustion. The German storm broke on February 21, 1916. The opening bombardment, codenamed Operation Judgment, was unlike anything seen before in the history of warfare. Over 1,200 German artillery pieces unleashed a torrent of steel and high explosives on a narrow 8-mile front. Over 1 million shells fell on the first day alone. The ground was churned into a quagmire of mud, steel, and human remains, a lunar landscape where entire forests were reduced to splinters. French forward positions were pulverized, trenches obliterated. German stormtroopers, using new infiltration tactics, advanced through the devastation, capturing the massive Fort Douaumont with barely a fight. It seemed Falkenhayn's plan was working perfectly. Yet, the French held. Under the new command of General Philippe Pétain, a system of rapid troop rotation was established to prevent any one division from disintegrating completely. And a defiant cry echoed from the shattered defenses: "Ils ne passeront pas." They shall not pass. The battle descended into a 10-month nightmare of close-quarter combat in shell holes, in the dark, suffocating corridors of underground forts like Vaux and Douaumont, and under the incessant, soul-destroying shriek of artillery fire. Soldiers lived, fought, and died in a sea of mud, surrounded by the unburied dead. The psychological toll was unimaginable, a descent into a literal hell on Earth. Yet, amidst this industrial hell, there were moments of almost surreal normalcy and incredible human resilience. The Voie Sacrée, the sacred way, was the one narrow, often shelled road into Verdun. Down this fragile strip, a constant 24-hour convoy of trucks, thousands of them, kept the city and its defenders supplied. It was a logistical miracle, a fragile artery of life-pumping men, ammunition, and food into the heart of the battle, and carrying the wounded out. An estimated 90,000 men and 50,000 tons of goods traveled the road each week. And there are countless accounts of the drivers, caked in mud and exhausted, sharing cigarettes and a few words of encouragement with the walking wounded they passed. A brief human connection in the midst of mechanized chaos. This road, more than any single fort, was what saved Verdun. While Verdun bled France white, the British and French planned their own massive offensive on the Somme River. The primary goal was to relieve the immense pressure on their French allies. The British commander, Sir Douglas Haig, envisioned a decisive battle that would shatter the German lines. The plan was built on the overwhelming power of artillery. The preparatory bombardment lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. Over 1.7 million shells were fired at the German positions. The noise was so immense it could be heard in London. The British High Command was utterly confident. They believed the German wire would be obliterated, their trenches flattened, and their defenders either dead or shell-shocked into submission. They told the infantry to expect to walk across no man's land, occupy the empty trenches, and deal with the shattered remnants of the defenders. They were tragically, catastrophically wrong. The shells, many of them duds or shrapnel shells ineffective against deep fortifications, failed to cut the thick belts of German barbed wire or destroy their deep, concrete-reinforced bunkers. July 1st, 1916. The day dawned bright and clear. It would become the single deadliest day in the history of the British military. At 7:30 a.m., along an 18-mile front, whistles blew. Tens of thousands of men, many of them volunteers from the PALS battalions, who had enlisted together from the same towns and factories, climbed out of their trenches. They began walking across no man's land as they had been ordered. They were laden with nearly 70 pounds of equipment, moving in disciplined, orderly lines. And from the safety of their deep bunkers, German machine gunners, who had sheltered safely during the ineffective bombardment, emerged, set up their weapons, and began to methodically sweep the field. The advancing lines of British soldiers were mown down like wheat. By the end of that single day, the British Army had suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, with almost 20,000 of them dead. It was a catastrophe born of overconfidence, flawed strategy, and a fatal misunderstanding of the power of modern defensive firepower. The battle would drag on for another 4 months, but its character was set on that first, horrific day. But 1916 wasn't just about the failure of old tactics. It was also the year of pivotal technological debutantes, desperate attempts to break the deadlock. In the skies, the role of the airplane evolved dramatically. No longer just passive eyes in the sky for reconnaissance and artillery spotting, aircraft became weapons of war. The development of interrupter gear, allowing machine guns to be synchronized to fire through the spinning propeller without shattering it, transformed aerial combat. Pilots now engaged in deadly acrobatic duels known as dogfights. Names like Oswald Boelke and Max Immelmann for the Germans, and Albert Ball for the British, became household names. These knights of the air and their chivalric duels captured the public's imagination, offering a narrative of individual heroism that stood in stark romantic contrast to the anonymous industrial slaughter in the mud of the trenches below. And then, on September 15th, during a later phase of the Somme offensive, a new and terrifying monster crawled onto the battlefield. Developed in secret by the British Admiralty's Landship Committee, the new weapon was given a deliberately misleading code name to maintain secrecy: the water tank, a name that was shortened and stuck. These slow, rhomboid-shaped, mechanically unreliable steel behemoths were designed to do what the artillery had failed to do: crush barbed wire, cross the cratered expanse of no man's land and its trenches, and provide mobile fire support for the infantry. Their first use was limited and plagued with problems. Of the 49 tanks available, many broke down before even reaching the front line. But the psychological impact on the German defenders was immense. Soldiers reportedly fled in terror at the sight of these seemingly unstoppable alien machines lurching towards them through the smoke and chaos. It was a flawed debut, but it was a glimpse of warfare's future, the birth of armored warfare. This year also saw the silent, invisible war of the airwaves intensify, becoming a critical third dimension of combat. Radio interception and cryptography became vital tools of modern warfare. At the Battle of Jutland, the only major clash of dreadnought fleets during the war, British codebreakers in the Admiralty's Secret Room 40 had partially deciphered German naval codes. This intelligence gave the British Grand Fleet advance warning of the German High Seas Fleet's sortie, allowing them to intercept it. While the battle itself was tactically inconclusive, this intelligence advantage prevented a potential strategic disaster for the British. On land, the war of signals was just as crucial. Specialized listening posts would use triangulation to pinpoint the location of enemy radio signals, revealing the positions of headquarters or artillery spotters. Other techniques like sound ranging and flash spotting allowed Allied gunners to precisely locate and destroy the German artillery that was causing so much carnage. Success in this invisible war could mean the difference between a shell landing in an empty field or on a packed supply depot, a general's headquarters, or a key gun battery. It was a cerebral, technical battle fought by men with headphones and slide rules, shaping the physical battle fought by men with rifles and bayonets. So, as 1916 drew to a close, the map of the Western Front had barely moved. The lines drawn in 1914 remained largely intact, but the cost of this stalemate was etched into the landscapes of Europe and the minds of a generation. Verdun and the Somme had claimed over 1.5 million casualties combined, becoming eternal synonyms for feudal sacrifice and industrial-scale death. The war had truly become a contest of factories, logistics, and national endurance. Who could produce more shells? Who could replace their losses faster? Who could withstand the psychological strain longer? The machine in all its terrifying new forms, the relentless artillery piece, the lumbering tank, the dueling aircraft, the invisible radio wave, now ruled the battlefield, promising a way out of the trenches, but at a cost that was only beginning to be understood. The horrors of 1916 forced a radical evolution in warfare, introducing technologies that would define the next century of conflict. Given the staggering events of this year, which of these technological introductions do you think had the most significant long-term impact on the way wars are fought? The strategic use of aircraft, the development of the tank and armored warfare, or the invisible intelligence war waged through radio and code breaking? Share your perspective in the comments below.